Hello, everyone, and welcome to the annual WriteHive conference. This year is packed, as always, with a ton of great sessions, perfect for writers, writing professionals, and the publishing industry in general. For all of you first-time attendees, please allow me to personally welcome you to the Hive. In case you didn't know, WriteHive is a nonprofit organization serving the writing community with free and inclusive resources, events, programming, connections, and just so much more. This year's 2024 conference brings you our wonderful session, How to Create Superheroes and Villains to Match. If you love this kind of content and you want more information on this topic, please be sure to check out the Word Nerd Cafe podcast, episode 95, Storytelling and Gaming, Staying Power, Memorable Villains, and the POW Writing Superhero Fictions from the 2023 WriteHive conference, all available on YouTube or through the WriteHive websites. Now that I've properly introduced the panel, let's meet our amazing guests, Matthew Phillion, Samantha Bryant, Cristina Jurado, and Justine Manzano. So, Matt, why don't you start us off with
Sure.
introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Matthew Phillion. I write the Indestructibles series and its spin-off Echo in the Sea. I've been writing superhero novels for officially 10 years. As of this week, it's my 10-year anniversary, which is wild. And I am really looking forward to this. I love talking about bringing this type of story into other mediums outside of, the standard comic book stories. So, and looking forward to hearing what everybody else has to say.
Awesome. Welcome. Samantha?
So oddly, this is also almost my 10th anniversary of writing superhero. Yeah, the first one came out in 2015. So almost. But I write, hi. First off, hi. I'm Samantha Bryant. I write the Menopausal Superheroes series, which begs the question, why should young people have all the fun? And I also write a variety of other forms of speculative fiction, mostly short stories and anything else that comes into my mind. Looking forward to this. I love writing superheroes.
Excellent. Thanks, Samantha. Justine?
Hi, I'm Justine Manzano. I have been writing not as long as you guys have for my superhero series, but my trilogy, The Order of the I'm sorry, the trilogy is Keys of the sorry. I'm not awake yet. My trilogy, Keys and Guardians, is a pseudo superhero fantasy story. Yeah, I write YA fantasy and work as a freelance editor, and also am cooking up a current more heavily superhero themed story currently for my next book. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Christina?
Hi, my name is Cristina Jurado. This is my first year as an author of superheroes. So I'm new in town. So I'm willing to learn a lot from the people in the panel. I'm reading you from Dubai, all the way from Dubai. And I normally write science fiction with a little bit of horror in it, normally in Spanish, but also in English. And I've been published a little bit in magazines in the US. Also, the book that has the superhero flair is called Limítrofes, which can translate as something like borderliners. It's about kids with superpowers. So I'm very excited. I hope it's going to be translated soon. And my next book in English is going to be Chlorophilia with Apex Publishing, and it's coming up in the fall. So you can check it out.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, welcome all of you. I am so excited. Once I saw this panel topic, I was like, I need to do it. It's too much fun. I can imagine just all the wonderful things that we have. And it's people look up to superheroes so much, but you got to give the villains their credit, all right? Villains are having a comeback and they're just as multidimensional and likable as superheroes sometimes. So with that, I'm going to ask the first question to the panel, which is, what makes writing superheroes interesting to you? So Matt, I'm going to have you kick us off.
Sure. It's funny. I was thinking about getting ready for this panel. I was thinking about how much it's changed because I've been writing them a long time. And when I first started out, what I liked was that sort of deconstructionist, like how do you, what makes a hero, sort of deep delve into it. And the older I get, the more what I like about them is how hard it is to do the right thing. And that's kind of what superheroes do. Like I feel like instead of getting more cynical, I've been sort of falling in the other direction. And that idea of like what doing the right thing is not the thing that everybody does, and that's what makes a good superhero is like leaving the world better than you found it, and that's kind of become the theme that I've latched onto. I also love that with superhero fiction, it's the kitchen sink genre. You can throw anything you want to in there. My books have werewolves hanging out with robots, and that's perfectly okay. That's what makes it fun to me is like you can throw any idea in this genre and roll and run with it. So it can be both complicated and it can be the best hot mess you can possibly come up with, and it fits with the genre perfectly. So
Definitely. Samantha?
Similar to Matt, I'm interested in the opportunity to grapple with moral dilemmas and weighty issues about identity and roles in society and expectations and the choices we make, but all while it feels like I'm playing, it's I'm having fun. I'm not limited to the limits of physics and what bodies can actually do and what's possible, right? I can decide that, sure, this person has renegotiated their contract with gravity. It's fine. Yeah. And so that combination of being limitless and having a great place to explore things that are bothering me at the heart of me and that I want to grapple with without writing some kind of literary fiction preachy thing that I wouldn't want to read.
Exactly. Cristina?
So for me, what I like about Villains is that I can write something that is very transgressor, and I can have the opportunity to make characters that can do very disgusting things without any moral, in my case, without any moral questioning, because that's what they do. That they're bad people. They're bad intentions, and their interests are bad for society. And that's what I really like, to tackle things that are considered not good for society, and those characters take on them to really break the rules, to the moral rules. And this is very, very interesting because I really like the what comes after that. So how people perceive them, and even how they perceive themselves along the lines. Because one of the things I like also is that when I write characters, I like them to have evolution. I don't like them to be always the same. I want them to maybe question themselves, or maybe not. Maybe they just reaffirm what they're thinking. But I like them. I like ups and downs, and I like other characters reacting to that. I think that brings a lot. And I think that people really like that because it's a little bit like real life, that not everybody's just playing. So that's what I like in villains, that part.
Justine?
It's funny, I find that I agree with every one of your reasonings. Like I'm like, I love all of this stuff about it, but I think that there's in addition to just having been a superhero geek since I was tiny, and like didn't even have my own collection of comic books, but was just like stealing my brothers and my sisters, and just like grew up with that. I've always been this kind of person that was just like had way too much empathy, and was also I've suffered with disabilities throughout my life, and so that kind of wish fulfillment of a person who sees what's wrong and can just push through everything and get up and do what's right, and keep like they have the power to do it, and so they do, and they don't wait for anyone else to fix the things in the world that are broken. When it comes to superheroes, I just really do love that kind of like, it's like a wish fulfillment thing for me. I also write in like I don't like genres as a rule. I know I have to follow them, but I don't like them. So getting to do the kitchen sink thing, as Matt said, and just sort of like have scientists like science stuff and fantasy and kind of and like little brief stints in literary fiction ideas and just sort of like smush them together in one thing is so much fun for me. But also that parallel villain side, like Cristina was mentioning, that getting to explore what makes people do the things that they do and do it just without really considering anyone else or feeling like what gets a person to that point. Like there's a lot of fun psychological, I cannot talk this morning, psychological things involved in playing with the ideas of people with immense amounts of power, whether they're good and bad, and how they deal with those things.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree with why, the freedom of writing superheroes and working in that genre and writing those types of stories. It's what everybody wants to read, right? Like we can go through our normal lives and we're going to have our ups and downs and everything's so plain and mundane. So to have this idea that there's some special spark out there is really, really appealing. So I write for middle grade audiences. So mine's middle grade fantasy, but I also have to consider what is the hero, what is the villain, how do I negotiate these things? How deep am I getting into it? Because I know the kids are reading it. So how much do I want to deal with that? But from my next question for the panel then is, what do you guys think makes a great superhero? So we're going to focus on the superhero side. And I'm going to start with Samantha on this one.
So far as writing a good superhero, I think it's really the same as writing any other good kind of character. For me, it's all about their emotional life. Who is this person? How do they feel about what's going on? That, these are people with extraordinary abilities, but my readers are probably not, at least not extraordinary in the sense of like flight and wielding fire and being bulletproof and that kind of stuff. So it's really important to have those points of emotional connection for a reader. And again, that's one of the things that I enjoy about writing superhero characters in particular is like I'm writing about something like I'm worried about getting old, but I'm writing about it in a way that's fun and light and lets me be a little hyperbolic about it. Like it's not just that my skin feels dry and itchy, it's that it's becoming actually bulletproof flesh, that kind of thing. So really it's not that different from writing other kinds of characters. The important thing is writing a full person with an emotional life, a backstory that's more than just an excuse for the current story, and all of that kind of stuff.
Cristina?
In my case, I really like to, when I was thinking about my book and what I was writing, I wanted to be a little different of what I've been reading. I mean, even though everything or almost everything has been written somehow, but I wanted to kind of depart from what I've seen in comic books and in other stories. And I wanted to use very, very psychological destructive powers. I was very interested in what are the consequences of those in someone who's growing up, like my main character, who's a young man that is the offspring of superheroes. So it's something new, something that nobody knows what is going to come up out of this. And the terrible, terrible, terrible price that he has to pay for the powers, because his power in particular is to be able to really how can I say this, to project in others a very severe depression, an acute depression. So the person touched by this character commits suicide. So it's the perfect mercenary, and it's been used as a mercenary, being a child, being a teenager. So that makes him also very depressed, because he has to be also in a kind of a place where he's almost as depressed as the depression that's kind of given to others, but also the consequence of what he does depresses him. So he's really you know, I really like to, and I think superheroes and villains are very good for that. That border line between being sane and being mad. I really think that we don't have to, but we can tackle with superheroes, with comic books somehow, and with villains. And this is what I'm interested in, but I know that there's many more bright stories than that. It's just that I really like the dark side, and maybe it's not so good for young people, but or not, you know, it's not for young readers, but I really like that because of, as I said, because what comes after that, the consequences, especially psychologically for this character and all the rest that have a relationship with him.
Wonderful. Justine?
Going off of what Cristina said, I think it's so important when you're building a superhero character to build in weaknesses. And I think that is definitely in his, for what you were saying is his journey is like a terrible weakness, something that would take him down when he does these things. And it's I think that's so important to have, because you can get really, really over the top with what superheroes can do. And if you don't have a drawback, then they're invincible. And what fun is that? You lose your stakes in your story. So whether it's an emotional drawback to what they're doing or a physical drawback to what they're doing, all of my characters have built in like stop points that they can't push past. And also just sometimes I just have the powers be like something that is, you know, it's not necessarily great for them. They can do it, they can use it to help people, but like I have one character in my stories that has a perfect memory. And it sounds really good, like when you're doing things like having to investigate crime scenes or having to like think through, you know, facts that you've acquired. But it really, really stinks when bad things happen to him because he can't get them out of his head and it traumatizes him. And so having that downside and having him be kind of sucked into that at a lot of times when he's supposed to be like pushing forward and being like the hero, is I think just really interesting to explore. I want to say fun, and that sounds terrible, but that low point for him is real fun to cut into now. But it is super interesting to explore the fact that even with all of your powers, you can be a superhero and it cannot be a perfect experience for you. You can be brave and it can still be hard.
Matt?
It's fun. You know, I say it's this kitchen sink genre and you can do anything with it, but I also think that if you put the word superhero in something, there's sort of some cultural connotations that you kind of have to lean into it, and that's sort of why we see a lot of repetitive powers or a lot of like themes that you'll see over and over again. You've got the super fast guy, or you've got the archer, so I think what makes a good one is finding some way of, because there's going to be those expectations. You're going to be compared to any other person writing superheroes. Um, and it's real hard to come up with something new that nobody's done before. So it's how do you make them a real person? As some of you've already said, like how do you make it so that they feel like it's not about the superpower, it's about the person that you're telling the story about. The superpowers are tangential to what you actually want to say. And I actually unintentionally avoided the whole, because there's that trope of like, what is their weakness, what is their kryptonite, what is the one thing that puts them out. And I didn't do it on purpose, but I'm like, I always found that kind of boring. You know, like, oh, so he's a green rock will take him out, or oh, you know, his one enemy is smarter than he is. And I'm like, I'm trying to think of what their weakness is, and every character I've written has no sense of self-preservation. And that's where the pain point is that rather than having a physical weakness or a flaw in their powers, it's that they'll throw themselves at a problem regardless of the harm it does to them. And that's become a theme through everything that I do, is just this idea of like it doesn't really matter what happens to me as long as everybody else is okay. And that's the flaw that I built into almost, and that's what keeps the characters as a group together too, is that there's nobody there with a healthy attitude towards self-preservation, and that's and if you don't have somebody hitting the brakes, what does that story say about the characters? So I kind of had to acknowledge we're going to hit all of the themes that superheroes have, like who can fly and who's super fast or who has. God, I love that idea of renegotiating your contract with gravity is such a wonderful way of putting it. But also breaking and with something like superheroes that have been around for as long as they have and have those concepts, how do you break the rules a little bit to tell a different story while also telling the kind of story that someone who picks up a book that says it's a superhero story will expect, so that they don't walk away going, that wasn't a superhero story, that was hard science, or something like that. You lied to me. I mean, I had one review complained that these characters called each other by their real names instead of their superhero names, and I'm like, wow, there really are some expectations in the genre, and I didn't even like. I love when superheroes call each other like Bill. Like I love when they were too familiar with each other, but just like there really are these expectations that we have as writers when you get into the genre, and then you got to be kind of clever and subversive on how to break those rules and still tell the kind of story that you want to tell.
I have to cut in and tell Matt that and call Matt out because he needs to show his mug.
I didn't even do that on purpose. I had my flash mug today.
Ah.
I actually
I
had
spotted
meant
it from the beginning and I was like, I need to say something about this at some point.
it was funny. I actually had been planning on using my I'm in the science fiction and fantasy writers guild, and I was like, I'm gonna use my SFWA mug this morning, and I lost it in the dishwasher. So I'm like, I just grabbed one out of the cabinet, and I'm like, oh, I'm drinking out of a flash mug during the superhero panel.
It's one theme. It's perfect.
Awesome. Yeah. It's definitely that there's that struggle of trying to make sure that your superhero's not so cookie cutter, that they have, all the positive sides and all the stories that we watch, they're always like, yes, everything's wonderful and it's beautiful. You have these superpowers and it saves everything. You can have everything at your disposal, which is so unrealistic, which is probably why critics and reviews are going to be like, oh, well, that doesn't seem likely. Well, it's like, but you guys are okay with this person having superpower and flinging, I don't know, cars across the road. But I tend to, when I think of superheroes, like I watch way too much anime, read way too much manga. So I
Social
love
chick.
the perspectives of mangas. And like the one I just finished was Mr. Villain's Day Off. So that leads me like directly to this idea of flipping the perspective of what villains are, has really become a trend, or it feels like we're giving villains more dimension and depth. They're not just the big baddies anymore. So with that, kind of seeing how you guys are showing the weakness and the realities of superheroes, the next question talks about, what do you guys think makes a likable villain? So looking on the flip side, we're going to flip the coin here. Cristina, you seem to you're like on team villain. It sounds like she wants to deal with a lot of that. So I'm going to start this question off with you. What makes a likable villain?
Well, I have a soft spot for despicable characters. I really I stumble upon them. I just write a lot of them for some reason. I don't know, it has to be with my mental state or something. But I really enjoy as a writer to write things that, as the rest of the panelists say here, you normally don't find in society. You can write anything you come up with. You can really break over the rules, all the moral rules. So you can have very, very despicable people, and they're very fun to write. To me, the more despicable, the better. But I know that there may not be for everybody, in sense of maybe it's not the right thing for middle grade readers, but for adults, if we're talking about the worse the better. Like I had one villain. Well, it's also like I like when the transformation of someone into a villain, that it's something that I'm interested in, and I invest myself a lot into it, because I really think that from trauma you can become a victim, but sometimes you can also become a villain. And the more the trauma, the worse you can become. I wrote a character called Lamia based on an old ancient story that, yeah, in some I think it was ancient Greece or ancient Rome. There was this god that the kids were taken away from her, so she chased mothers who just gave birth and their babies. That's what she did. And I tried to come up with an idea what would have to happen to a woman to become that type of a monster despite herself. So this is what I wanted to write, or this is what I like to write. People who are monsters or villains or even superheroes despite themselves. Like they don't want to, but they have those powers, and then they are in this side, on that side, because they decided, or because they're used by some organization or some group or some circumstances. That's what I like, really, to be a superhero or a villain despite yourself. And I think that sometimes when you can't fight the odds, that's very, very interesting. See what, what comes out of it. So to write a very despicable, or in this case, a very despicable character like a villain, I really like to look into my own life and see what things that really make me itch and use them, because I think that this is, as I'm new in the genre, this is what can help me to write something credible or believable, even though you don't have to believe in those things, because anything is possible, but at least something that somebody could read and think, yeah, that I can hate this person because this and that and that. So this is what I try to do also, like use my own experience. Sorry about all the all the words and all the ideas coming at the same time.
That's how writers' brains work. So it's totally, it makes perfect sense to me. Right. Justine?
I feel like, I guess it depends. Like, do you want your villain to be a likable character? I mean, a lot of people do. I don't necessarily always do that. I tend to have my villains they're people. I think it's important to make them rounded people, but there isn't really any redeeming quality to find there. They are who they are. But I think that if you come at it, and I think this is what many super villain writers do when they're working on really strong villains, like say Loki, who ended up becoming a hero in time, but and like I'm trying to think, Kingpin from Daredevil, like specifically from the Netflix series, was so well done, is because there was a strong story behind how he got that way, or how they got that way. And there's a lot there. You can still see there are people they care about. There are things that tether them to something we can relate to. They tether them to our moral ground, but they don't pursue that protection of family, or that, like, those normal things that we all have. They don't pursue them in the same way. There's something different about how they go about it. So like with a Kingpin, the fact that he will seriously just murder anyone who gets in the way of the people he cares about, because, well, why not, right? Like, he's very interesting, and you love watching him. Your eyes are drawn, but he's evil. Like, there's never a doubt in your mind that he is like not a good guy. But it's interesting to watch how he relates to people that he does care about, or how he very much feels like he is the hero. And I think that I always love to at least when I'm watching something or reading something, I enjoy that dynamic. I enjoy that idea that if the story was told from his point of view, would you know how evil he is? Would you understand? Or does he think he is the hero of his story?
Matt?
Funny, my relationship with writing villains has evolved over the years, because I used to teach courses on how to write sympathetic villains and how to write complex villains. But the older I get and the more I see of how villains are in the real world, the more I want to write villains with zero redeeming. I mean, the worst people in the world do not care about other people. And those are the villains I want to write about. Who are the people who will throw their own family under the bus, who absolutely have, because greed and selfishness is so prevalent among the worst people in the real world that I want that to be the counterpoint. If the superhero is the best person in the world, who's selfless and caring and kind, the antithesis of that is the monster. And the monster isn't Grendel, who is a sympathetic character. It's the CEO, or it's the mobster, or somebody who, or someone who doesn't have to be that way. It's a choice to be evil. And we have so many real world examples that's what I delve into. I have a lot of jokes like, oh, is capitalism the bad guy again? I'm like, yes, because it always is. So, and that's what I delve into. And I've kind of lost interest. I used to really like writing complex villains who like might do a heel turn in the right direction or might stop and agree with the hero at the last minute. And I'm kind of done with that until the real world gets better because I don't need those stories anymore. I want to delve into what's wrong with the world that we're living in. And that's what really fascinates me now. I'm kind of over it with the when I keep laughing, like Disney needs to stop doing the I mean, I know Cruella de Vil was a fun movie, but we don't need someone who kills puppies origin stories about why she's not a bad person. She kills puppies, you know, like that. I'm done with that kind of character. And we have that theme now. A lot of movies are doing. Here's the like, are we going to do Gaston's origin story and show how he became? Oh, it's okay that he's a misogynistic SOB. Here's why he's like that. No, I don't want that. He's a bad guy, you know. And that's kind of where I've hit. And the older I get, I've become kind of radicalized with villains. I'm like, I've met a lot of CEOs. We have plenty of people that do not actually deserve a redemption arc anymore. You know, like I don't want to know why President Snow might be sympathetic. I don't care. You know, and that's my take on and superhero genre is perfect for that because you can have the counterpoint. My favorite one is the Superman Lex Luthor thing, where you've got here's somebody who shows us how to be better by being better, and here's someone who could be the best person in the world, and he's so petty and greedy that he does nothing good for the world because he's petty and greedy. And that's what I love about the superhero counterpart. I think we kind of do like the yin yang, black and white, can be too simplistic, but it's also the perfect genre to do that level of like, here's how to be better, here's how to be worse. Um, and I've also, I mean, I'm a 90s kid. I grew up with the really grim, dark, you know, scary hero kind of vibe. And I'm like, and I'm kind of bored with the deconstructionist kind of thing of like the boys, you know, like give me some hope, man, you know, because the world doesn't have enough hope in it. I mean, I also joke around that I've kind of stopped writing superhero and teetered into hope punk instead of as a theme because that's kind of where my heart is right now. But yeah, as someone who spent years teaching how to write sympathetic villains, I'm like, I think I was making a life choice that I didn't want to make anymore. So that's where I am right now. Is like I think what makes a good villain these days is someone who helps point you in the real world at where villainy can really exist and what you can do, at least even by being aware to leave the world better than you found it. Because superheroes are aspirational, right? Like that's kind of what they're kind of there for. It was a genre invented by kids that didn't know the world was awful yet. And that's where the genre kind of was born from. So that's I mean that's my soapbox that I get onto these days. But I'll joke around like I've gotten so radicalized in my old age about this theme that that's just where my brain is now. It's like how do I make the villain so bad that he could actually probably own a yacht in real life? Like that's my villain right now.
Awesome. Samantha?
So I struck immediately on the word likable because as a middle-aged woman who writes middle-aged women, I hear way too much about likable. And you know, I'm a Betty Davis fan. I don't think a character has to be likable to be compelling. And it's not my goal for my heroes or my villains necessarily to write someone who's likable. I want to write somebody who's compelling. In fact, that whole idea that somebody who doesn't seem likable could be the hero is important in the menopausal superheroes. You know, Patricia, who's also the lizard woman of Springfield, is not a kind, soft, or friendly woman. And if you met her, you probably wouldn't like her on the first go. She might grow on you after a while when you start to understand one another, but she's not likable. And so, you know, likable gets me. But in terms of writing a compelling villain, I think I see what Matthew's saying about letting the bad guys be all bad, but you know what? I don't let my good guys be all good. I don't let my bad guys be all bad. Everybody in my books are gray because that's my belief, is that everyone is. Everybody could turn one way or the other, but you know, all kinds of actions are in you. So a lot of times I'm looking for this moment with a villain where you go as the reader, well, she's not wrong. Now, what she did about it, maybe that's wrong, right? But the kind of the idea that got them going, kind of like what you a famous example would be in the Black Panther Killmonger, right? You know, you can look at him and see he does all kinds of villainous, violent things that are wrong to do. But when you look at the reasons behind and where he was coming from, part of you's going, he's not wrong. So that's what I think I'm looking at with most of my villains is something like they're the difference between them and me isn't what we think and what we think might be right or wrong, but what we're willing to do about it. And there are boundaries that I and my hero characters wouldn't cross, but my villain would. Their line in the sand is a lot more wobbly.
Yeah. No, I mean that makes perfect sense because I like morally gray characters. So I tend to live in the gray and then that line. I think for me, maybe not like I'm a bit newer to writing, so I can consume all kinds of stories. But I think like nobody's 100% good, no one is 100% bad. So I tend to write in that we're all morally gray, and that's probably something that as I've gotten older I've leaned into. I think as a kid you're wearing those rose-colored glasses, you think everything's fair, the world is going to give you your shot, and like that's like high school. You're young, your early 20s, and then you hit your late 20s and your 30s, and then the world just sucks. And so now, like in my 40s, I'm like, that's not how the real world is. I don't put rose-colored glasses on for my kids, which is probably horrible for them. And I tell them too much. But I tend to like let people know that so much of our world is in that gray space. And I feel like you see those trends and you see that in what do we define as superheroes? What do we define as a villain? And then how do we kind of negotiate that space? Who gets to control that narrative and who gets to control that definition? So that kind of like leads into the next question where we're talking about what are some of the common misconceptions we have? I think you guys have touched on it, but what are the common misconceptions about heroes and villains? Right. So, Justine, I'm going to have you start on this one.
I really think that my big misconception that I see a lot, specifically like as somebody who is a big consumer of superhero fiction, is this idea of like you were all saying, you've all touched on that a superhero has to be like this angel who does, is always there for everyone and has no selfish moments. And I think that even even the most like superhero you could think of, Superman, has selfish moments and has moments he wishes he could do more, or that he also like it skates all the way from like wishes he could do more or is frustrated because he has a life and he is responsible in such a way for like all of these people to protect them. And it's like, but I have a kid, like I want to take him here, I want to do this. And then he has to like, here's a call and he has to run off and go and save someone. And it's like, yes, obviously he wants to save them, but he is also like struck with this like struggle between, who he is as a human and who Superman is. Not a human, but you know what I mean. And like who Superman has to be for the world. And I think that a lot of people, when they're like not really entrenched in superhero fiction, tend to go, oh, well, he's a good guy. How dare he do that? Or, even in like Man of Steel, when people were watching that movie and everyone was mad that he killed Zod at the end, and it was like, nah, I get that. Like it made sense in the way that things were going. It probably should have happened sooner, based on the destruction that was going on. Like it was something he couldn't bring himself to do, and that made sense, and eventually did. But like there was like people were being killed left and right. Like you can understand why he would make that choice. So it's one of those things where like you don't have to craft a superhero that is only super heroic all the time. They're internal. They may act that way externally, but when you're going into their internal lives, they can be selfish, and they can be frustrated by it, and they can get discouraged by the evil that they encounter. The whole point of it is just like when you say that like bravery is not being scared, it's being scared and running in and doing it anyway. It's the same thing for superheroes. Superheroes can screw up, they can think poorly of the situation, they can wish they never had to do this, but they get up and they do it anyway, and that's what makes a superhero compelling.
That's funny that when you just said that, I just kept thinking of I can do this all day. With which actually might be the theme that I work with the most, is just it's that whole like getting back up again. But I think that for misconceptions is that there's only one way to tell a superhero story. Because we've heard 4 very different ways of approaching this genre just on this call. And I do think the audience sometimes will come to a story with an expectation. It's like, that's not this is not the superhero that I wanted to hear. And I think our genre can be kind of marginalized in a way of like, well, it's this kind of story. It doesn't tell anything of importance. And oh, I'm sick of this there being so many films of super, like it's a genre that is a vehicle for telling stories of all kinds. It's just like anything, just like the allegories in sci-fi, or just like telling modernized stories in historical fiction and kind of tweaking things. It's a tool to tell good stories. And I think the misconception that bugs me the most is like, oh, you write it's only for young readers. No, there's a lot of really amazing adult superhero fiction out there. And I think that's the misconception that weighs me down the most, is that people come at it with, oh, this must be for little kids, or it must be very simple, or it must be black and white. And some of the best writers I know are working in this genre, telling really complex, really intellectual, really challenging stories. And because it's a comic book, or because people fly in it, people won't take it seriously. Um, and I guess the other misconception that troubles me these days is that it feels like the most popular ones are the deconstructed ones, and it's still possible to tell classic superhero stories smartly and do good things with it. So I think it's less misconceptions about the heroes and villains themselves, and more the misconceptions the world has about the types of stories you can tell with this, because it's a great toolbox to play with. I wrote romantic comedy before I wrote superheroes. Like, so this was not where I thought I would be at 47 years old. But there's so much that you can do with it. And I think the misconception of it being too simple, or you can tell a simple story wonderfully with it. So you have that ability to do it so in different ways. And I'll climb up that's another soapbox I'll climb up on top of and yell. It's like, you can tell so many different superhero stories. And that's what that's the I just picture myself, the Jon Snow at the battle with the sword coming up, like, I will protect my genre with my life.
Awesome. Samantha?
Yeah, I like what Matt was saying about it being a type of story that you can write a lot of different stories within. And I've heard steampunk described that way as well, as like steampunk is more of an aesthetic, and you can write a steampunk murder mystery. You can write a steampunk romance. You can write a steampunk action adventure. And it's kind of the same way with superhero, right? I've got a good friend over at superherofiction.com who writes superhero romance, you know, and I haven't gotten to his books yet, but I'm very intrigued by this idea and want to read them. So I think so far as a misconception within the genre that bothers me though, is the whole a hero has to walk alone thing. You know, I used to be a teacher, and when you're a teacher, everybody's always telling you a hero, which is a way of saying, I don't have to give you any support. You're gonna save the world anyway. It's a way of letting everybody else off the hook. And you know, in the real heroes in the real world, you know, people who work as in rescue fields or even just mental health fields and are trying to save people, they are heroes, but they don't walk alone. And they, you know, so in my own work, I definitely try to build a community for my heroes. They still have spouses and partners and children and friends. They don't become some kind of hermit who's trying to protect everybody by isolating themselves. And if they do try to go that route, their friends go in and get them and like, that's stupid, dude. Isolating yourself is only going to eat you alive. So I think, you know, I see that one a lot, and especially for female heroes. You know, female heroes, you know, think your way through Marvel and DC. Can you think of anybody who has a partner and gets to keep them? Yeah.
Can I just like jump off of something that Samantha said real quick? I'm reminded of this like running joke in the Batman fandom because I'm a huge Batman fan. And they, you know, Batman works alone. He always works alone, right? That's the whole, but
And
he
he's
always
so
had,
good.
he had like 15 partners. Like he's got like a ton of Robins or past Robins and like a ton of Batgirls or past Batgirls that have grown into their own heroes. And so he does not at all work alone. And he has Alfred and he has like, you know, he does not work alone at all. He might think he does, or he might prefer to, but he's always got like 7 kids hanging off of him, 7 sidekicks. Like, so like exactly what you said, like this idea that it's so cool to be like, you know, this loner that's a hero. It you know, it doesn't have to be that way.
So we need Matt to go use your romantic comedy background and go write us a grumpy sunshine romance for Bruce.
Absolutely.
Or you could just go crazy with it and match him up with Superman. Anyway.
But it's fun. I just sorry to do the tangent, but I had my current daydream of if I ever got to work on another IP is having it turn out that Bruce Wayne in his off hours rehabilitates injured birds because of his theme. Like, well, you know, he does fix a lot of broken little robins, you know, like that's kind of what he does. And like have the opening panel of the comic book have Bruce like putting a little cast on an actual robin with a broken wing and be like, he does care about other people.
Perfect.
It's been my daydream recently. I'm like, I really DC will never hire me, but if they ever did, they're getting a panel of Bruce putting a cast on a bird. I swear to God, that's what I'm gonna do. So
sorry, I took you guys on a tangent. My fault.
Cristina, bringing it back to misconceptions.
So for me, one of the misconceptions that I try to fight in my writing is that the superhero wants to be a superhero or a villain wants to be a villain. But in this case, normally when I write, the superhero doesn't want at all to be in that position. And it's just put in that position by circumstances or by his own moral ideas or values, and it has to do it because he has the power to do it. So this is one thing that I think people may think that, yeah, they are superheroes, it's clear. No, but it's not that clear to them. And sometimes they don't want to be in that spot. They just don't want to be there. They don't want to have the responsibility. They don't want to be in that position, but they have to, and they struggle with that or not, but they could. So that's the thing that I really like, that kind of like, you know, questioning of themselves. And I also like to see the differences in different cultures, like what would be something that you may think it's a characteristic of a villain or a superhero in a certain culture and maybe not in another one. I'm not sure, but I can guess that there are differences, and it would be really fun to explore them, because also I think that, as some of my fellow panelists mentioned here, the real heroes in our society, sometimes they're people, not sometimes, most of the times, have no capes, no no funny customs, and they have to face a lot of powers, and they have to fight with very little that they have. So it would be very interesting to see, and I'm not so sure I'm the best person to know, but I know that in this part of the world, in the Middle East, probably superheroes will look different. Like, I know this one that I really like. It's called Kahera. It's a female superhero in a full abaya. She's not covered her face, but she has, she covered her hair, and she has a black abaya. She's super strong, and she can fly. And she is in particular helps the weak people and the women that are being, in problems in her hometown of Cairo in Egypt. And it's so much fun because she just hits hard to all those people who are really bad in that kind of costume that you wouldn't think that, you wouldn't think a superhero is going to be wearing that. Well, she does, and she's pretty feminist, which is kind of strange. And I also, one of the superheroes that I really like, and they're he's not what you expect, is the mule in it's not a superhero, sorry, it's a villain, the mule in Asimov the Foundation. So he's someone that, it's an oddity. You wouldn't think he's someone with powers or somebody that can scheme things, but he's there, and he's a great character to have, because he's a surprise, it's an anomaly. So those are the things that you don't expect. I think also are something that could be interesting to see in different cultures. What is it expected from a superhero and supervillain, and the differences? And I think this is something that tackles into what we could consider a misconception in one culture. It would not be a misconception in another culture.
That's awesome. That's very true. The cultural expectations is kind of like why you really have to know who your target audience is when you jump into your stories. And so this idea that, none of us write for everybody. And so when your book goes out into the world, 100% of the people are not going to like it. There's going to be some percentage of people that they're like, this story doesn't make any sense, and like, I don't understand it at all. It's just awful. And it's like, well, that's because the story wasn't written for you, right? So like, deal with it. It's okay. That's part of the world. There's another book, there's another story somewhere. So this idea of being aware of the cultural influences is so important, right? The more that we are exposed to all of those, that's why we need diverse stories, right? We're exposed to these different perspectives, the better off I think we come out on the other side. But so with the next question, it's when we think of these, I think like Matt, you keep talking about, you have this dichotomy and you've gone from one end of the spectrum to the other. But the question that we have is, what do you think are the best ways that we can make sure a superhero and their villain are quote unquote equally matched, right? So are they matched with opposite sets of skills, like the example gives brains versus brawn? How is it that we can make sure that there's this sense of equality, whether it's real or not, right? So Matt, I'm going to have you start with this one.
I think the real drama comes from inequality there. I think giving the superhero should always start on the bottom in terms of who has more power in the power dynamic, because that's where the drama comes from too. So I mean, really, the best thing you could say, it's how do you stop somebody who has that much more influence, that much more power, that much, and whether it's money or influence or strength or brains, or like, how do you overcome that? And I actually think the challenge that a lot of writers have is when creating superheroes is the opposite. Is how do I make sure there is an imbalance to up the drama? Because I think that's why people turn to, they make traditionally very good, very strong superheroes into, what if they went evil? Like that's been the cheap trick that a lot of pop culture has done lately. It's like,
Right.
what if somebody like Superman was evil? I'm like, how about the real challenge here is how do you make it interesting when someone is that strong? And I think if your hero is that strong, how do they hold back? You know, how do they show softness if they are strong and hard? How do they show empathy if they're cold and brilliant and intelligent? Like pulling the hero back to humanize them is actually harder than making them equally matched with their villain. Because the best part about writing villains is they can be as big and bad as you want them to be, and you without consequence, right? And sort of the more over the top you make your villain, the more the emotional payoff of having the hero overcome them is satisfying. Have I know that's where it starts. I keep going back to other people's superheroes, but like, you know, Superman chasing bank robbers is a little unbalanced. You know, like the dude can pick up a car. You know, like nope, just because
Why
you
you don't
didn't.
see him in Gotham that often. You always see
Yeah,
him in Metropolis where all the aliens come and like
it,
it's for that reason, right? Like you can't have him running after bank robbers. It would be
yeah. It's how do you, it's that balancing thing. Even I mean, going back to others, like that's why I don't have much patience anymore for billionaire superheroes. We've got no evidence that a billionaire will ever do anything good with his money ever. B, usually they're punching down if they are the billionaire superhero. And
the
C, how do you make
imaginary part.
yeah, and C, how do you make that interesting? You're fighting people with money.
Is it like almost as to make having money a superpower, and I'm
Yeah,
against that.
Sure.
yeah, and people well, you know, what is he without the money? And they'll, you know, well, I'm this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, you're still a rich guy. You know, I want to hear stories about someone who does it all they can for the world with what little they actually do have. Um, because that's a harder story to tell. Like I was Spider-Man having no money. Like
I feel like
Peter,
sometimes they give a character money for writer convenience. It's like, I want him to have this really cool jet, but how could he get one?
yeah.
So they make him rich so he can just buy one.
Like that guy
Right.
couldn't even afford like a Civic. Like he's not flying around in a jet. Like you know what I mean?
Right.
He can't afford his New York subway pass for God's sakes. Don't get so that's what I actually find that to be the bigger challenge than trying to balance them. Until you get to that sort of end game of the story where maybe they finally are face to face. But um anyway, that's where I come from is I really want a huge power imbalance so that it feels scarier for the hero and it feels
Right.
more of a challenge for them to come out the other side on top.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you're saying it, you think of that power and balance and the idea of pulling back. I keep thinking of I watch too much K-drama too. So it's like when you're reconceptualizing a superhero, there's the strong girl Bong Soon, and there's a sequel, but the line of women are superpowers. They are like super, super strong, but they have to use their power for good or what they deem as being good, because if they use it, like if they mistakenly hurt an innocent, they'll lose their power. But she has a scene where her boss is trying to get her to hold like rein in on her power, because if she taps like a punching bag, it'll break or whatever. So it's learning to like pull back on that just so she can be normal. But they do a really good job in that series of kind of redefining what a superhero should or shouldn't be, um, in like this different cultural context. But that one where she's got like Superman's strength, but she has to learn how to be able to not, I don't know, break tables when she pounds her fist or something. So being able to pull that in. But Justine, what do you think are the best ways to deal with that equality
When
damage?
when I approach it, I also like I go for the whole craft side of characters. Um because I want to see the conversation between who the villain is as a person and who the hero is as a person play out throughout the story. So when I'm crafting them, the needs and wants of the hero and the villain always contrast. And like they and they have to really get into each other's way on the road to those things. And that's really where I started from. So like I have a character who, you know, comes in thinking, you know, superhero work is fun and she can't wait to be a superhero. That's killed by like the end of book one. She's just the wind is taken right out of her sails. But when she comes in, like she is very much like a product of superhero culture, like I am, and is reading all these comics and stuff, and comes in, is like, I'm gonna do right and be good and whatever. And her villain is someone who is in the same in like organization as she is. They're in a superhero group, but she's like power. Yeah, okay, we'll help people, but the side effect of that is we're big and strong, and we can rig this game however we want. And that, you know, having come from this like very superheroing is fun kind of idea, and getting thrown into the reality of what it's like to really see someone who is loving her power and wants to use that power to, you know, bend the world however she sees fit. It's And then having those two clash against each other, to me that was the fun of the imbalance there, because she was also far more experienced. So you have a far more experienced villain who knows how to use her abilities, and then you have this like new young, you know, starter who's like all idealistic, and just sort of watching them play off each other and what they want. Like, you know, Jacqueline feels like she comes in, she's going to save the world, and she's been, you know, given her, you know, superhero pass, and she's like ready to take it on. And just seeing her ideals crushed is like a huge part of her personal journey as a hero, and what she finds it means over the course of the trilogy to actually do this work. And they just consistently crash into each other throughout the series, on the way to what they're the way they want to work as heroes, because my villain really genuinely believes that she is the one that's doing the right thing. um she isn't, everyone hates her. But yeah, like really balancing out the not just the abilities and the powers, but the emotional lives of each of them, and having those clash, I think, because sometimes you could wake up ready to take on the world, right? And the wrong word said to you can crush you.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, an important part of, you know, remembering that our villains and our heroes are supposed to be people.
Right. Samantha?
So I don't think I worry about trying to keep it balanced. I worry more about keeping it interesting. Like it needs to be a good fight. There needs to be the right amount of tension in here. We can't walk in knowing that clearly the hero will win. It'll be no trouble. It'll be a cakewalk. Because how boring is that to read?
Right.
You know, nor can we walk in being like, well, clearly our hero is about to get crushed, and then they do, right? It's about setting expectations and reversing expectations and keeping the tension going. And in my particular work, my villain is Cindy Lou, and she's a mad scientist who accidentally created all these heroes who are now fighting her. And she has a lifelong friendship with one of the heroes. I already mentioned Patricia, right? So Patricia and Cindy have been friends since they were college students, and now one of them's in their 50s and one of them's in their 60s, right? So they're, you know, they've been friends for a while. And something I've played with there is the way that they, because they know each other so well, they can exploit each other and manipulate each other. And they know how to tempt each other to cross lines that maybe they wouldn't have crossed otherwise. And I've also played a lot with, like, you think you know a person, right? You think you know a person, and then they make a choice that you are blindsided by. You have no idea that was inside them all these years. So all of those themes are kind of how I keep it going. But, you know, if Patricia ever punches Cindy directly, that's the end of the series, because she's tiny. Patricia's going to kill her. So they don't fight like that in my because I'm trying to keep the tension going.
Can I just say having a villain named Cindy Lou is like my favorite thing. That's incredible.
Yeah, Liu. She's Eurasian, but she's well aware.
Oh, okay, I thought it was like a middle name, but that works too.
No, she's well aware of the Dr. Seuss joke in there. And it pisses her off.
Christina?
So for me, it's a little bit like what all my fellow panelists said. I'm more interested in the conflictive interests, that I think this is what it has to be the most important, because no matter where I'm not so worried about their abilities per se, or even their motivations. It's just their interest. If you are getting on my way, I don't care who you are or what you're capable of. Well, I may kind of think about how am I going to take you, but you're on my way, I'm going to fight you. And also, I love what Samantha was saying. By the way, Samantha, the most powerful superhero in my story, it's a middle-aged, probably in their late 50s, African-American woman who's capable of block everybody else's power. So she's the most powerful one. And I made a choice to make her this person, because I wanted someone that is always, or not always, but most of the times invisible, not wanted, or even oppressed. And I wanted someone like that to have all the power, the most power. And in that case, I also think that unexpected choices, as I mentioned, is something that I think Samantha talked about it, to be a little bit, to do something unexpected also makes it very interesting and makes the tension go up, and ends up being a very interesting story when there's a match, when there's two characters fighting each other somehow.
Great. Our next question. How do you make sure that the characters' ideologies, motives, themes, contrast, conflict, or challenge each other's? I'm going to start with you, Justine.
Well, I feel like that's really similar to what we were talking about in the last question. But yeah, it's definitely like takes a lot of planning, I think, in advance. But that's just me. Like I'm a plotter by nature, so maybe Panelists would feel differently. I tend to have a good handle, but I say that, but I tend to have a good handle on who my characters are going to be, but they surprise me sometimes as well. Like I'll put them in a situation and the solution that I thought they would give me, it doesn't feel right anymore and I have to change it. But when I am planning the general arc of these characters, I feel like I really do put in a lot of time in planning where their interests lie and what their end game is and how that works against the like if I'm dealing with the superhero, how does that work against the villains, and how could I put them in a lot of situations that will show that without again making it like as Samantha said, if your hero and your villain actually get into a physical altercation, a lot of the times it's like it depends on what their powers are, but like you were saying, like she would be dead if she just like punched her. It's also about that, like it's about keeping them from having an altercation where it's an obvious win, but having them have to deal with each other in ways where maybe they can't fight yet, but they have to kind of skirt around each other and deal with each other in other ways, which is a big part of why a lot of my first book in my series was very much mind games through the whole thing. It's all a how do I stay safe while I'm obviously trying to subvert this person, and like because of the fact that like you've got these different power dynamics, it's how you play with them. But I think it's really important to kind of have them kind of get in the way of each other, as far as their like actual plot lines and what they want.
Yes. Samantha?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for doing a bit of mirroring or having a foil you know, like these two people are in a way two sides of a coin. There's some central issue that's like you could go this way or this way, and they went two different ways. But it's there isn't like one way to do this, which is part of the fun. Gosh, if there's one way to do it, what would we talk about at this panel? We'd all just be like, yes, you're right. I think it's for myself, I've gone the history route because having them have a history together and think they know each other. And you see that in other superhero stories, even if they didn't know each other in their like secret identity lives. Often they've fought before. Like, you know, how many times has Batman fought the Joker? More than a few,
More than
right?
me,
So
actually.
they know one another. So that history aspect can play into things as well. But I also like the idea that if they could have met in other circumstances, maybe they would have connected in a positive way. They could have been friends or lovers, or at least like respectful acquaintances. They could have been colleagues, if not for, you know, the line that one of them crossed that the other one can't accept the crossing of.
Awesome. Cristina?
So for me, I like to kind of redefine what getting into a fight is a little bit, as Justine was saying, that sometimes it doesn't have to be necessarily a physical fight or an obvious one. There are many mind games that you can play, that the characters can play, different manipulative situations that can be in. And also tackling a little bit of what Samantha was saying, I love also to use family ties because I think that when you use them, you're supposed to be very safe. You're supposed to be safe in your home, and with, you know, your family is supposed to guarantee your safety and you care for you and everything. So when the enemy is within that circle, I think it brings something very powerful that everybody can immediately you know, relate to in a way. And it's not that you have to necessarily relate with villains and superheroes all the time. I'm not saying that, but I think it can be used to drawn into situations where you can make your, you know, your heart grow and, you know, feel like, wow, this is bad thing. And those two, it's a son and a father, they're, you know, fighting each other. And I'm not saying it's not like Vader and Luke, but something that people that supposed to know each other, they don't know each other because they've been apart for whatever reason, things like that, things that are unnatural in a normal situation. I love to use those also to make, you know, the people confront themselves. So yeah.
Awesome. Matthew?
Sure. It's funny. I hadn't thought of this, like the trick that I use until this conversation came up. But what I realized is I think the way I do this is the villain question is what do they want? And the hero question is why do they do it? So the villain wants something for themselves to, you know, whether it's power or money or something else. And the hero's journey is the why, like because no one else can, or because it's the right thing to do, because I was in the wrong place in the wrong time and I have a guilty conscience and I'm going to be the person to save the day. Because I don't think anybody steps out to want to be a hero. You know, like nobody walks out the front door and goes, I'm going to run into a burning, well, one profession goes, I'm going to run into a burning building today. And I'm pretty sure that profession would rather not run into a burning building if they don't have to on a given Tuesday. They're just willing to do it. So I think the villain's ideology is what do I want for me or for my organization or for whatever it is. Because it's focused on them, whereas the hero is always looking forward of like, how do I make sure that doesn't happen, because that's going to leave the world worse than I found it. I was actually, it's not the Indestructibles, but the spin-off series Echo in the Sea was supposed to be a lighthearted adventure at sea at sea. And I'm like, oh, this is about warmongering versus isolationism. And then the main character's like, you're both idiots. And that's kind of like the whole thing. There's like, she's pulled into the story and the two sets of villains both have sort of these selfish and unyielding motivations, and the lead character isn't like, okay, I'm going to do the right thing. It's like, how do I keep them all from doing the wrong thing? And her motivation, it's what was it, Clerks? I wasn't even supposed to be here today, I think is a really good excuse. I was just playing the Indestructibles are very young characters. Like, I was playing PlayStation 10 minutes ago, and now I got to go save the world. I hate this. I didn't, I was gonna play with my dog at the park and play some frisbee, and now I got to go stop an alien invasion. You're jerks. You're ruining my afternoon. So that's kind of how it's almost lower stakes for the hero, because they're not out for necessarily for fame or for to be known. They're just kind of there because someone has to step up. Whereas what I really want to know is, what does the villain want? Because that's in how who are they willing to whose throat are they willing to step on to get there? And then kind of contrasting that reactive versus active, or proactive versus reactive motivations for the characters. I didn't even realize that this is my theme of how I do it, but that apparently is the trick I use for myself, and I had no idea until about 10 minutes before this call when I was looking over the questions. I'm like, I'm learning something about myself today on this panel. This is great.
So, okay. Our last question for today is, does the dynamic change if you reverse the roles of the hero and the villain, right? So, Cristina, I'm going to start with you. Do you think the dynamic changes when the roles are reversed?
Well, I don't necessarily think, I mean, as if the dynamics in which sense? The
Like, if
dynamics
the villain is the
between the
protagonist and the hero
yeah.
is the antagonist, so we're flipping it.
Yeah, because I write really strange characters that you never know, you're never sure the superhero is really a hero and the villain, it's that bad, really? I think for me, I like this, and I know it's not the norm or anything, I'm aware of that, but I like this gray area in which you constantly have to rethink about, okay, so I was rooting for this guy, but maybe that is not the right thing to do. I should have rooted for the other one. And I know that one of the comforting things of superheroes and villains literature is that who's the bad and the good guy, and you can root for one or the other, or you cannot root for anybody, but you can just enjoy. You don't have to rethink. It's not like how my brain operates. So I like a little more investment into the story, and I like that. So I like to sometimes reverse, sometimes reverse, and then you are like, what's happening? Why is all doesn't make any sense? But it's like, I really like that, but it's very dangerous. It's not
easy, and it's hard, and it's not for everybody, and it's sometimes you just don't want to do it because it's too hard and it doesn't bring you what the person, the reader is expecting. So I wouldn't recommend it, but it's fun to write.
Awesome. Matt?
I don't write this way very often, but I do love the story where if you turn the camera around and you're like, oh, wait a minute, are we the bad guys? My favorite example isn't a superhero story. It's if you turn the camera around on The Walking Dead in any given episode, the heroes are absolutely terrorists walking across the countryside, murdering people left and right. If you turn the perspective, it's like, oh, if you don't know anything about these people that you care about, suddenly they're like, they just walked through and destroyed a village. But for villains, because I'm sort of obsessed with the idea of the villain who is a villain because that's what they are. I do like the idea of reversing that, where the villain doesn't have a choice. I had a theme of, because it's young superheroes. What if they're putting up against our kids that have been experimented on to become weaponized? And there's where the sympathy is. The real villain is the person who weaponized them. There's no redemption for those people. But what about these kids who are out of their element and out of their own control? And they can seem like a monster at a distance. And then literally in the stories, when confronted face to face, it's like, oh, they're just like me with way worse luck. They were found by the wrong person and used by the wrong people. And that kind of flip there. And at that point, is there any way to fix them, or is the fight already nearly over and there's no redemption for anybody at that point? And what are the consequences psychologically for the people that face the fallout from that that moment. Um, I I actually really enjoy watching other people write stories. Like Christina was saying, like I want to see somebody else tell that story. For me, I'm on the sort of theme of not reversing that role because I'm sort of obsessed with real world evil these days. But I'm fascinated by people that do that well because that turn, especially if the reader doesn't see it coming. If the
Right.
reader spends 200 pages and then go, wait a minute, have I been in love with the bad guy this whole time? Those are amazing. That is a craft that I admire in other writers too, because it's such a powerful tool to flip on the reader because you're like simultaneously betraying them and realizing how clever the story is. It's the Kaiser Sose moment from The Usual Suspects. Like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
whole time, you got me.
Right.
So that's an amazing tool, and I don't think enough people take advantage of that ability to turn the story around, especially because that sort of circumvents that it doesn't redeem the bad guy. I think that's the important thing too. It doesn't make the bad guy into the hero. It just changes the camera angle for the reader to learn something about themselves and about perspective and about understanding the people that they're reading about.
Samantha?
Yeah, I think whether somebody is perceived as a hero or a villain is often where you are standing when the thing happens, right? If I'm inside the house that just got knocked down on me, I don't care if you knocked it down on your way to save someone. You just destroyed my house. So you're a villain to me. So that's definitely part of this dynamic. But I think the way it came about for me is in the first book in my series, Going Through the Change, Cindy Lou is not a point of view character. She does things, but we never hear it from her perspective. But then in the second book, she becomes a point of view character. And then you start seeing a little bit of why she does what she does. And I think as soon as you step into a villain in a point of view character, well, that's an extreme act of empathy. You really have to get inside that person and be able to understand why they're doing what they do. And it doesn't, I like what Matt was saying, that it doesn't necessarily change them from being a bad guy. I'm not looking to redeem Cruella de Vil here. I'm looking for just like a deepening of the understanding of why, how did they get here in the first place? And as a writer, I think there's this extra level of challenge in keeping my reader engaged with a character who's going to do heinous things, right? That they don't want to be like, ugh, I don't want to be in this person's head. So there has to be enough empathy and connection there, but I don't want to undo that they're a villain either and just be like, oh, really, they're not that bad. It's just a misunderstanding. No, this isn't a misunderstanding. She's done some horrible things and she deserves punishment for those. But we can maybe see how she got there in the first place. And so when she does the bad thing, and sometimes there's a shift too, right? Like I was with her, she crossed a line. And now I'm watching it the same way I might watch a train wreck because I just have to know how far it's going. I have to know how bad the damage is. I can't stop watching. So, I think when I'm writing in the point of view of the villain, that's kind of the way it shifts it. It's a different sort of writing challenge, but in some ways it's not.
Justine?
It's that same idea that we were talking about earlier about both people are humans, right? Or not, maybe if not humans, I guess I shouldn't say that.
Both people are people.
They're people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Humans is another thing entirely. But yeah, they're both people. So you want to see like something makes someone the way they are, even if they're completely terrible people. That doesn't just come out of nowhere usually. Like there's something built, something taught, something like about society, something they grew up with. It's grown from somewhere.
Trauma,
Even
yeah.
even
Like I always sympathized with Mr. Freeze, right? He was just trying to save his wife.
Mr. Freeze
That
is a
seems like a
great
good thing
pathetic
to
villain.
get.
So the perfect sympathetic villain to bring up, because you get it, and everyone just keeps getting in his way and making things harder for himself, and he's just trying to save his wife, right? Like, you can see things from his point of view. And I find, for me, in a similar way to what Matt was saying, I don't tend to do that for my villains. They still are people with motivations and reasons why they are the way they are, but it wouldn't be, I don't think it would be a comfortable place. It might be interesting to live in for a little bit, but it wouldn't be a comfortable place to live in their head for a long time. The lack of any kind of like moral grounding on what they're doing might be a little bit unnerving. However, for me, there's not just one villain in my stories. There's an overarching villain through the whole thing, and then there's like little villains that pop up here and there, right? And those little villains are where I have my fun. Because when my heroes are trying to do something, other people do often get stepped on along the way. And if you're doing your hero right, like you were saying about knocking down a building, there are going to be people that are affected by the things you do if you're in the middle of something that you can't control. If you're like having this big epic fight, someone might get hurt, and it might not be the person you intended to get hurt, and that has ripple effects.
Right.
And that's where I like to play with perspective and have characters come in that are not good to the main characters, but you can see where they're coming from, and they're not exactly evil either. And that's where I have all the fun when it comes to like playing with villain perspectives and stuff like that, is in growing those characters that are the lesser villains in the piece, that just are like kind of collateral damage in this war between, hero A and villain B, and just, are done with it. And want to like, can you guys just stop? I don't care who wins at this point, but you're crushing my house.
It made me think of the movie The Incredibles. Mr. Incredible saved the suicide, right? And he's like,
Yes.
"You didn't save my life. You ruined my death."
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, this has been just such a delightful conversation, and we all love heroes and villains. So it's great to see how it is that you guys conceptualize those concepts, and then how you're dealing with those perspectives. But before we sign off for this panel, I want to give you guys a chance to kind of promo everything that you're doing. Where can we find you? Tell us what your links are, what's working on next. So I'm going to start with Justine.
Okay. So I'm kind of figuring out what I'm working on next. I just wrapped my superhero YA trilogy, Keys and Guardians. And you can find me on JustineManzano.com or Justine_Manzano at like everything, pretty much everything. And yeah, so I'm here at WriteHive all the time. I'm actually on the board, and I'm like a coordinator here. So if you ever have questions or you want to like ask me things, you can always like DM me at WriteHive, and I'm always around. So yeah, just that and Word Nerd Cafe, which is actually my podcast for WriteHive with SKF and Hannah Cates and Tiffany Christina Lewis, where we talk about all kinds of things about craft.
Awesome. Cristina?
So I am one of the 3 co-founders of futurahouse.org, which is a webpage for Hispanic authors who write in English or are translated into English to showcase their short stories. You can find me there. There are my socials there, and my upcoming short novella in English is coming, I think it's September, with Apex Publishing, and it's called Phillion. This is not about superheroes, even though there are some heroes there. And the one that is about superheroes is called Limítrofes, and it's coming out in Spanish in May, and I hope you can read it in English too soon.
Matthew?
I'm all over. I am on social media too much. If anybody ever wants to talk shop, either Matt or Matthew Phillion, depending on if I made it before I became an author or after. on everywhere because I'm still trying to figure out where the next big home for authors is going to be. So you know, Instagram threads, Blue Sky, although anywhere you're hanging out, I'm probably there. Come find me. My next project is an anthology of Indestructibles and their shared universe stories that a lot of them have existed in digital format for a long time, and people have been like, when you're going to put out a print copy? I'm like, well, and when I have some new stuff to add to it so that it's not just a bunch of stuff that's already existed. That'll be out this summer in time for all the Comic Cons that I'll be at. I'll be at Fan Expo Boston in June and Terrificon in Connecticut in July or August. I forget when it's happening. If anybody's local there, come say hi. And yeah, I'm online too much, and I love talking about writing. So if anybody wants to ever talk shop about superheroes or fiction, I write The Indestructibles, Echo in the Sea, and a D&D meets Jumanji story called the Dungeon Crawlers series. Oh, and I'm on the podcast the Ravens Valley Institute Presents, which is a actual play shared storyteller concept that I was the narrative designer on for 2 seasons. So I'm all over the place, and I love talking about writing. So come say hi.
Samantha.
So I'm Samantha Bryant, and I think that's pretty much what you need to find me. Like if you Google Samantha Bryant, add the word author, otherwise you're going to get an actress, and I very rarely wear ball gowns. You can find me on most social media as Samantha B Writer, just the letter B in the middle. And you can find me on a Facebook-based convention called Continual Convention, the convention that never ends. I do a lot of panel work for them. And I hope you'll check out the Menopausal Superheroes. The first book is called Going Through the Change. I am currently almost done writing the 5th and final. If you've never had to write a series ender, it is a butt kicker of a task, but I am almost there. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to get the entire series in 2025 when the last book comes out.
Thanks.
I'm rooting for
Wonderful.
you. I just wrapped my trilogy and it hurt.
Yeah. I have another idea for a series, and I'm like, no, just no.
Just
I
standalone in
want a
between.
one book idea.
All standalones from now on, right?
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. We've enjoyed this conversation. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. So we will see you guys on the boards. Bye-bye.